Good morning, everybody. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker of the morning, Dr. Heather Chapman, who is a clinical psychologist, an international certified gambling counselor, and board-certified clinical consultant for the National Council on Problem Gambling, and a member of the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers. She is an associate professor of psychiatry at Case Western Reserve University and director of the Gambling Treatment Program at the Cleveland VA Medical Center, the leader of gambling treatment, research, training, and consultation for the Department of Veteran Affairs and Department of Defense. Speaking throughout the world, her research and clinical interests include the relationship of gambling behavior with trauma, suicidality, and treatment engagement and retention. And I also would like to mention that Heather was recently elected to the National Board of Problem Gambling, Board of Directors, and I'm pleased to be able to serve with Heather in that capacity. And so it gives me great pleasure to introduce Heather.
Thank you. Appreciate being here. So one of the things I like to do when we start this out, of course, we just had Veterans Day, but one of the things I like to do is to really help us think for a few minutes of the veterans and our families. And the majority of us do have veterans in our families. Sometimes it's first generation ourselves. Sometimes it's one step back, or my father. Sometimes it's people back, my uncles, my cousin, my other cousin, my great cousin, so kind of looking at our veterans and looking at the history of this. My first video on here, and I use it like for sometimes an icebreaker when people aren't, icebreaker is probably not the right word, but when people aren't paying much attention, it really does get people's attention. And as we've gone through the years and looking at veterans and veteran care, it really changes over the years depending on what's going on and what they go through.
Get out! Damn. Car bomb. Whoa! Holy shit!
We got 13 minutes. God damn!
Yeah, we'll probably have to back up for this one. Oh shit! I called it.
So sorry about that. I think I fixed the battery problem. It looked like it was not plugged in all the way. So this is the difference what's going on now, and this is something that's really important. I remember about 15 years ago when the Gulf Wars were really in full swing. I remember talking to my chief of psychology at the VA, and I said, something's different with this group of people. There's something really different. They can't drive. And he, he's more in the office at this point. He said, what do you mean they can't drive? I said, they're really nervous about driving. They're something about the difference between, what was going on in the service now versus then, because this is where people get hurt. So, and I bring this up because just the other day I got this referral from New Hampshire, and part of the problem is the guy wasn't coming into treatment. Significant PTSD, he's not coming in, he's really having a hard time. Significant, actually, sports betting problem, which we're, of course, seeing more and more of these days. And we talked about the difficulties of getting him care because he's avoiding driving. So again, really thinking about this is one of the most important, newest elements to treating people with gambling issues that are newer to that are more recently discharged from the service or have served overseas in the latest Afghanistan or Iraq. You need to make sure, you need to know this. Getting stuck in traffic, that's where you die. And so they might not show to your appointment because they have to drive to you or they're stuck in traffic. So interesting thing. And so this is the stuff, and this is kind of, in my mind, culturally informed care is ethical care. So really understanding the ethics of caring for people and how you work with them is really important. We're going to go through a lot of stuff. I'm going to talk probably way too fast, but I'm sure you'll be able to keep up. I'm Heather Chapman. This is not the views of the VA. I work for Big Brother. These aren't the views of the VA or the Department of Defense. This is from my own experience and also from the Center for Deployment Psychology. They have a culturally informed treatment for veterans and DOD, and I've used some of their information as well. And I'm going to thread in as we talk about what does this mean when we're working with people with gambling problems, because obviously that's the point of this conference, and it is my job. I've been working at the VA since the late 80s in a lot of different ways. I've done research there. I've assisted people with developing program, and now I've most recently been running the gambling treatment program. So this is one of the things that's super interesting about the military culture. This is General Petraeus. And this is his resume. It's right there on his body. And so when you're in the service, you really know who you're responding to, who you're looking at, what's going on. You know immediately what to expect. If things are a little bit more clear in that way. When people leave the military, it's very much not clear. Things are a little bit more nuanced. And I think that it is sometimes difficult for people when they're leaving the service because they don't have that automatic understanding of what's going on and who they're facing. If you see the general, you know how to respond immediately, and you respond accordingly as would be appropriate. So again, looking at this, and I don't know what these all mean, all of these little things, but each of those little badges means a specific thing. And it's really important to know that that's a huge difference. So when you think of military and veteran culture, think about what do you believe? Just generally, what are your thoughts about it? What are your preconceived ideas about it? We all have them. You know, what is it defined as? Have you ever thought about military as a culture? One of the things that I do ask my folks when they come into the treatment program, because we have a national treatment program just virtually and in person now. Thank you, COVID. But virtually and in person, one of the questions I asked was being in the military, was that important to you as a person? Is that important to you that you did that as a person? And I didn't ask that for years. It wasn't part of what I inherited from the program at all. You know, yeah, we work at the VA, okay. But I'm like, okay, we're missing something. So I would ask about place, you know, where they live, you know, the occupation they might have, their ethnicity, and if that's important to them as a person. And I started to ask this as well. And by and large, it's extremely important to people who have served in the military that they did. A lot of feeling of pride for what they did, for themselves and for the country. So we're going to really look at these cultural competencies so that we can convey care and understanding and respect, so that we can make a culturally informed assessment and then provide treatment that's also culturally informed and fitting for the support that they need. So let's look at describing military members. What are your beliefs? Is military service a good thing? Do you ever think that members of the military are rigid? Does military foster dependence? Military members are strong and committed. True or false? Military members have to deal with great suffering. I would support a family member enlisting in the military. They can't seek support from each other. They have to live as military first. So again, trying to begin to recognize some of these nuances that you might see. I went to a wedding this summer, and one of the gals there, her husband's in the military, and I met her and I had heard about her before, and I never met her. We're in the bathroom together, the bathroom conversation. Everyone's primping each other. She was in the wedding. And I said, "Thank you for your service." And she just stood in, and she's like, "Thank you." She goes, "Nobody ever says that to me. They say it to my husband, but they don't say it to me." And so she talked about, just very briefly, it was a wedding, we're trying to have fun. But very briefly talked about, I kind of had to hang up my career for a while. And she's getting a little antsy because she's, it's been, I think, 5 or 6 years of doing that. So it's really interesting kind of looking at this piece. It's really important to understand these biases and really understand, I think I'm a motivational interviewing person, and really understanding or being able to put yourself in their shoes, really being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, I think helps you understand them and have compassion so that you can work better with them. And I think trying to do that with the military is a little bit more difficult because it's the culture is fairly unknown to us unless you've been in the service yourself. So again, asking questions, it's an important piece of asking questions of what was the military like for you? What did you experience? What was your job? This is really interesting these days. What was your job? What was your MOS? Because frequently people did stuff that had nothing to do with their job. Their job was X, and then all of a sudden they're leading a whole group of people, and that wasn't their job at all. And they didn't get the appropriate increase in rank as a result of it. It's happened quite a bit. What are their help-seeking experiences? What is it like for you to seek help, to ask for help? What would it mean in the service, particularly if you get people that have been in the service for a long time? What does it mean in the service to ask for help? And that's a really, truly scary space for people. Because it's particularly with gambling disorder, it could impact their ability to do their position, because they need, special secret status and so forth. And they won't be able to have that anymore if it's been demonstrated that they have significant debt or problems with a disorder like gambling. What are their strengths? What are their resources? Okay. So it's really starting by making this culturally informed assessment, by gaining knowledge of the experiences of the military. And I always start out with, just tell me what you're comfortable with telling me, because they're really not coming in for their military experience to my office, or coming in for their gambling problem. But it gives me context. So tell me what's going on, what happened in the service, and the context of this. And it really does help with that case conceptualization of sometimes, again, how gambling may have fit in there, or maybe even how the difficulty of letting go of gambling might be in there, and how that might be working together. So again, you want to make sure that you're looking at their risk factors and their resilience factors, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about that. So where do your beliefs come from regarding the service? And these beliefs come from sometimes an automatic connection to the veteran, because you're a veteran, or your husband's a veteran, or your wife's a veteran. So you have a closer personal experience connection, which can be good, but it also can be problematic because, as we showed in the beginning, one veteran is not one veteran is not one veteran. And maybe friend or family experience. There's a very powerful mythology. There's a very powerful connection to the military life in many families, and they will members of families will go and join the military generation after generation. And these are very powerful motivators to join. It can also be a powerful source of disappointment, of frustration, of difficulty, particularly if somebody doesn't want to join or they join the wrong service. A Marine family does not join the Air Force. Air Force family does not join the Marine. So you can see that as well. But one of the biggest ways that we get exposure is media. And this is an extremely important piece. And I've seen a lot of mistakes made in this arena. So be very mindful of what's going on in the media, or what kind of media portrayals there are of the military. And before you give somebody a homework assignment to read a book or to expose themselves to some kind of media, really understand the portrayal and the impact that it might have on them. I do that too for gambling movies. There's a lot of gambling movies out there. I don't tell my guys to just go on and just watch Uncut Gems. It's a real good one. It is a good movie. I like it. However, it's very triggering. So you want to make sure that you're understanding the triggering. It works in the same way. So you want to be mindful that these dramatic, intense, vivid portrayals affect us and affect the way that we see war. The news that we're seeing is very much affecting us in the way that we're seeing the war that's going on in Ukraine. They elicit very significant emotional reactions. You have to really think about your ideas about war and defense. Is it justifiable? When is it morally justified? Can you support it or not? Can you support the effort in that you're working with someone who's in the DoD or a veteran? And that's something that's an ethical discussion within yourself and your own comfort, because not everybody is comfortable with that. So really recognizing that and recognizing what might be pulled up if you're working with someone that's gone to war. Right now, joining, you're more likely to go to war than in many different times in our history. And there's really these debates of whether this is justified or not. There's these split-second life and death decisions that our folks are making and that they live with for the rest of their lives. I had a guy that I worked with years ago who was 50, and he was in the Guard, and he was brought in. He had a significant gambling problem. That's why I was working with him. And I really thought he would have PTSD, and he did not. He had no symptoms, and he was 50 years old. He was a gunner in Iraq. And he said, he goes, I didn't have PTSD, but a lot of those young guys that I was in with did. And a lot of really horrifying results to those young soldiers that he described. But he said, he goes, I knew what I was getting into. He goes, I was 50. I get it. And that, I think, cushioned him from developing a deeper problem or scarring from it. So our challenge is really neutrality. And our challenge, what's very important is to really recognize who's the client, because if you're working particularly with the DoD or you've got someone coming in from the DoD and you're going to be working with them with a significant issue like gambling or some other issues, PTSD perhaps, it becomes challenging because the person that's sitting in front of you can be impacted by the work that you do in therapy. And you need to be mindful of that. You also need to be mindful if the DoD has hired you specifically to work with someone, that at that point, in a way, they're the client. I say this about families all the time. Who's the client? You'll have a family member coming in and they're very concerned about the person with a gambling problem, and you have the person with a gambling problem coming in and not so concerned about it and really not wanting to come in. Well, then the client becomes the family member. So really kind of, and it becomes their work. I'm pulling in Sheila Wexler's work here. It becomes their work. Not changing the person with a gambling problem, but really thinking about themselves and what they need to do. Your social views of this are really important in recognizing, what do you think about firearms? Are they dangerous? And, the folks that I work with have a lot of firearms and sometimes arsenals, a lot of firearms. Talked to someone recently and she said she had a gun at her bedside table. I said, well, is it locked? Do you have one of those little gun locks that we give away on it? And she goes, well, what use would that be? And she bought it for protection. She also had suicidality. So it's really looking at this and recognizing this. But as a non-gun owner person, I don't have guns. She was she thought it was funny. She's like, you don't have a gun without bullets in it. That's useless. It doesn't make any sense. And really looking at the different cultures there, but at the same time, maintaining her safety. Killing someone would yield moral issues. We can have this belief that and it doesn't necessarily happen this way. You can compartmentalize it too. It might come up later. Early on in my career, I worked with a guy, it wasn't specifically this, but somewhat in a way. He was in Battle of the Bulge. It was early on in my career. I've been at the VA for a long time. He was at Battle of the Bulge, and he was a medic. And I was doing a disability assessment on him because at the age of 80-some years old, he was recognizing he couldn't work anymore, and his work was planning gardens for some of the larger houses in the Cleveland, Ohio area. And he said, well, the first time I met with him, I was talking to him and he said, who are you? What are you? What is this? And I said, I'm a psychologist. This is your disability exam. And he said, I'm not crazy. And he stood up and he left. And I was like, okay, that didn't go well. So I was like, so I called my, the lead of this. I said, what are we going to do? We got him back in. He was very apologetic. He goes, I don't do that. I'm very sorry. He goes, I just don't talk to psychologists. I'm like, I get it. We're very weird people. So he's sitting and we're talking. But this was the dilemma of his. He was a medic in Battle of the Bulge, and he had to decide who was going to live and who was going to die. He had to decide. There was too much work. And so he had to look at people and go, okay, tree shrapnel, that was a thing in Battle of the Bulge, sticking out of the neck, these big pieces of trees, or sticking out of the gut. That guy will make it on his own. He'll be fine. He'll be in pain, but he'll be okay. This guy needs a lot of help. This guy needs some help. Okay, I'm going to go for this guy. Maybe I'll get to that guy later. But if I go with that guy, this guy will definitely die, and probably some of the other guys. Never talked about it. Many years later, started talking about it. So this is, the lesson in that is I think this is going to happen with the newer generation of veterans too. That over time, people are going to begin to see and discuss and feel, what might be going on and what they're basically tucking inside. Now, of course, there's generational differences. Generationally, there was a more stoic generation, World War II generation. So clearly there are those differences, but that is something to always consider. Do military members have a higher calling to serve? Do military members, are they on a power trip? And I'm not saying these things are true or false. These are just things that people can believe. Military members lack and need structure, so they join the service. So many people that I work with have said that. It's very interesting. They're like, well, I joined the service, get this. I joined the service to get away from gambling. Oh, I'm so sorry. There's so much gambling in the service. And one guy that I worked with in particular said that and, lost his paycheck almost immediately because of a gambling kind of activity. Being part of something bigger than you can teach you. It teaches you. It helps you. So again, understanding and going back to this firearms piece, understanding and feeling your way through firearms, and obviously firearms availability has increased over the years, but it's really important to recognize your own feelings about this and your own feelings about someone that used firearms, in a military respect. So the reasons people join the military, there's lots of different reasons. Again, like I talked about people joining because of the culture of their family. We've had people, many people, I had a colleague that worked with me who said, nobody in my family had money to help me go to college except Uncle Sam. I thought that was cute. So that's why she went into the service. To serve country, to support family, to get out and stay out of trouble law, to do something noble with life, to obtain money for college, access to free medical care, protect people, country, way of life, be part of a team, something bigger, get out of adverse life experiences or life circumstances. That's a huge reason why people join in. To travel, due to an inherent sense of selflessness. It's really important to ask, like, what was the reasons why you joined the military? It really actually gives you a lot of information about them as a person. Just be curious about their military experience. Like, why did you join? And why did you join that service? I always ask that too. And you'll hear, well, that's where the smart people go, or that's a tough one. They're tough guys, or, I like ships. It might be a lot of things. Or my whole family did that. That's where or I did it because my family didn't do that. So ask. And ask why they stay. So the reason why they came in frequently isn't the reason why they stay. And ask why they leave. There's lots of different reasons why people leave the service. It's extremely interesting to ask that. And it's extremely discombobulating if people leave the service and it wasn't planned on their part. Like they have to leave for a medical reason, or for something that happened at home, or for psychiatric issues. That can be extremely difficult, particularly if somebody had in their mind at the beginning that I'm going to make a career out of this. And then all of a sudden, everything gets topsy-turvy. And I've had people it's all kinds of reasons. People fall off a truck, and then they really hurt their back and they can't carry the pack and go through their exercises anymore. So if they can't meet those fitness standards, they're not going to be able to maintain their service time. So again, ask, be curious. Be curious about their story, and then how it fits with them as people. Ask them about team membership. Ask yourself about team membership. What's it like to be part of a team? Are you a good team member? Team membership can be difficult. Working together in a common goal, it's not just about you. And we tend to be kind of about you. In our culture, we're kind of youisms. And in the service, it's really about the team goal. It's about working together on a goal. And it really requires giving up part of your personal identity or your personal stuff for that bigger goal, and following that person that's telling you what to do, no matter what. And that's really hard. You really have to give into it. Do I know which of my clients are service members? Do I know which ones are veterans? It's important to evaluate the impact of that. It's important to talk about deployments. Where were you deployed? How many times were you deployed? What that looked like? What was that experience like? Working with a guy recently, serious, pretty heavy gambling problem online, significant PTSD. And he was deployed, and he worked in the prisons. He was a prison guard. And he has a lot of trauma around that, around stuff he saw, around just the whole management of it. It was very difficult for him. Really understanding, how do you respond to people that might say you can't help? You don't get it. And I think most of us have experienced that in our career, where people say, well, do you have a gambling problem? Have you ever gambled? Well, you're not going to be able to help me. Have you been in the military? Do you know what it's like to, Early on in my career, I had a guy, he was a veteran, was concerned about some illegal activity that he was engaged in. And I say engaged very clearly because he had a moment of recognizing that, oh my gosh, I'm going to be in big trouble. And he realized he needed to stop this behavior. And he was terrified of going to jail. And I was young, and I talked about, well, you can do this. Like, if it happens, it happens. Trying to get him ready in case he's going to go to jail. And he's looking like, are you just watching TV to figure out what it's like to go to jail? Do you have any clue? And I had no clue. I had no business talking about that like that. I didn't know anything. So don't do that. Again, we learn. You can help by listening. You can help by just being a humble and kind and listening, and allowing yourself to put yourself as much as you can in their shoes, not necessarily for the details of what they're talking about, but for the emotion of what they're talking about, for the feeling of what they're talking about. Because you might not be able to get that. You might not be able to get the details, of that story and really put yourself in those shoes. But you could put yourself in somebody's shoes if they're afraid or they're concerned or they're worried about something, because we can just tap into that for ourselves, or they're grieving about something. Because certainly what we see a lot is a lot of grief among people that are grief and shame and guilt, which is some symptoms of PTSD. Guilt that I didn't do what I needed to do. Guilt that I was supposed to be on that convoy that just blew up. And at the last minute, I was like, I kind of feel sick or whatever, or the boss, the captain told me to not go on, and that convoy blew up. So how do you get people? And the most people that I work with at the VA that I work at, and actually all VAs, the majority of people are not service members or previous service members. The majority of people just are really good at listening. So again, how you assess, it depends on, the care setting that you're in, the focus of treatment, the time available. It doesn't mean you do none of it. You can touch on some of this. And respect some of it. And there'll be some people that you work with that'll say, well, it doesn't, it's not a big thing for me in my life. And there are other people that'll say it's a huge thing in their life. There's one gal that we treated, she was out of Maine. And we talked to her about military culture and what it felt like. And she goes, the thing that felt really good about is wearing a uniform, because it gave her a sense of connection to something bigger. And then she said, come to think of it, when I've worn uniforms in other times of my life, I felt like that too. So it brought up a bigger conversation. So deployments, we talked about this briefly. You have to look at deployments. We're getting obviously fewer and fewer. World War II, some Korean War still, although they never called it a war. Conflict. My dad was in that conflict. It was a war. Sorry, DOD. Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. You can see the deployment periods that Vietnam typically was for chunks of time. There were people that were redeployed. But in Iraq and Afghanistan, there's lots of repeated deployments. Some war, some humanitarian. Some they thought was humanitarian that became war. So it just really depended. So again, they really correlate with a range of physical and mental health issues, and they may only come to light during a deployment history. I have to say, there's so many people that I've worked with over the years, and the trauma never came to light at all until they were coming to the program. When gambling was a problem, they came to gambling treatment, started looking at some of the stuff, and we're like, you've got PTSD. I had a guy that was at the Pentagon on 9/11 and had a horrible gambling problem, never talked about it, and went through that 9/11 attack at the Pentagon and never talked about it. So really kind of, being curious with them and allowing it to unroll. Some traumas are military sexual trauma, being attacked while in the service, a sexual attack in the service. And they've found over the years that the numbers of male servicemen and male servicemen who have been attacked and meet criteria for military sexual trauma are much higher than we ever had expected in the past. So it's really important. It's one of the things that we do is make sure that we, at every admission, we talk about that. We make sure that we have the information about that. One of the things that's important to know about MST, and we're talking about team membership, it is very similar to what you see in maybe in sexual trauma in a family or incestual sexual trauma, because it's one of your own are traumatizing you or hurting you. And so it has significant impacts on people, and really recognizing that. So again, in part of this is recognizing our own value set, the way that we look at the world, what's important to us. Even politically, I took some of the political slides out of here because this is a huge slide deck. Really recognizing the impact of politics, we always know that that's not something to be bringing into the therapy room, but it's an incredibly important piece, working with people who are supporting our government and how that can impact how their political views can come in the room and how you might be able to work with that. So this is the really pivotal piece. How do you then, you got military culture, and how do you work behaviorally? What is the difference between mental health culture or treatment culture or VA culture versus military culture? This is an extremely important piece. So our culture, this is the famous, cultural iceberg that we see everywhere. We see, there's stuff that's above, our food, our flags, our games, our literature, dances, arts and crafts, fashion, language. It's the stuff that we see pretty pretty openly. Then we have something on the waterline, which is, sort of attitudes toward people, rules, works, authority, cooperation, competition, relationships with animals, age, sin, death, that's all the heavy stuff. Communication styles, personal space, touching, what's in different parts of the country, we know this, right? I have a national program, it's great. Get the guys from New Jersey who will come up to you and pick you up, squeeze you real tight. And you got other people that are like, maybe, so it's just interesting. We all have our different sort of ways of expressing ourselves. Different courtesies, and different, small towns in the United States where you do the little nod, you're driving down the street and you're like, I remember my daughter's like, why does Dad keep doing that? I was like, I don't know. And, because we don't do it really in Cleveland, but outside of Cleveland, you might do it a little. It might cause problems in some areas, some areas of the country. Did you nod at me? Cleanliness, modesty, beauty. So again, stuff that's really clear, less clear as you go further down the iceberg. In the military, what's above is the uniform, the medals, the salutes, the ranks, That's the stuff that's very clear. That's stuff we see right away. This guy again. And those are all his medals. Forgot I had this. Lots of stuff. He did a lot, okay? Master parachutist. Humanitarian Service Medal. Again, Bronze Star. So lots of stuff going on. You can see right off the bat, people that are in the service know exactly who this is, what's going on, and what to do, and how to to salute this person. Salute General Petraeus when you see him. Then on the waterline is the service creed, the core values, and the oaths. And there's oaths to every single branch of the service. The service creed is very much part and parcel of how that service acts. What's the expectations. And then down lower is this discipline and teamwork and fighting spirit and self-sacrifice and warrior values, warrior ethos, and warrior beliefs. Stuff that you don't see necessarily on the top of the page. So again, it's this indoctrinated and trained aspect of this warrior ethos. You take an oath of service publicly and personally. Dedication to the nation, to its leader, whoever the leaders are, that's the dedication. Nearly all training experiences reinforces that commitment. And they extol the virtues of sound character, selflessness, courage, and loyalty. So you can imagine if I have somebody that's coming in the program that has a very significant gambling problem and comes from, really believes in this, the existential moment of kind of what have I done? And it's one of the things I do frequently, because a lot of times I'll get people in the program that they've never gone to any mental health, anything, anywhere else in their lives ever. And sometimes they get this look of like bewilderment on their face. And it's just a simple reflection of you're a little in shock right now. This is a lot. And I even buy it. I even say that, I said this a little bit earlier, but I didn't say it exactly this way. Our jobs are weird. It's like psychologists, social workers, LPCs, et cetera, peer counselors. There's this expectation that people are going to come in. I do think that early on in training, people think, okay, I'm going to get people in. They're going to come in. They're going to change. It's going to be marvelous. I'm going to feel really good about me. They're going to feel really good about them. We're going to feel really good together, and everything's going to be great. And it's really not like that at all. And I think that there's still this, if you think about where people learn about therapy, there was that show In Treatment. Not a fan. I know it was like dramatic and everything, but come on. I was not a fan. Because I'm like, this is giving people really weird ideas about what therapy is about. But again, it's like, I think people come to us and they can feel uncomfortable. They frequently, if they're not used to it, it just feels a little weird. Are you gonna look at me and tell me what's going on with me and see things that I can't see? It's a vulnerable moment, I think, for people. So I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States, these oaths. I serve the people of the United States and live the Army values. This is particular for Army. This written creed fosters instilling military ethos. Early on in my career, I worked with a group of guys who had some substance use disorder, but significant PTSD issues. And they were all Korean War veterans. And I called them one day soldiers, and that was really stupid because that soldiers are Army people. And the Marines were like, silly lady. But again, it's like just recognizing oh, shoot, thank you for teaching me that. So again, there can be a lack of confidence in mental health professionals, or even a concern about mental health professionals that they might overstep some boundaries or might tell on them and might, injure their career in some way. So there'll be this reluctance to support military sexual trauma, particularly in males. Stigmas and problems can be seen as weaknesses. Some years ago, in California, they embedded chaplains in a lot of the troops to help with this, to help decrease stigma and help create conversation. There's some really, really great NPR interviews on that. There's also some really great StoryCorps stories on the military and military culture. Just really fascinating. Just even like being in Afghanistan, there was one about a guy being in Afghanistan and playing soccer with one of the kids in the neighborhood. And then all of a sudden one of the kid was, I think he disappeared, or he may have, I don't know, but something terrible happened. And the grief that this, I think it was a Marine, had regarding this experience. So why did you join the Air Force instead of another branch of service? Well, my uncle told me to join the Air Force. Okay. Or we have a history of Air Force in my family. Or I like to fly. Or it seemed cool. What was compelling about being a soldier, a Marine, an airman, a sailor? So what was your job? Did it change? When you're deployed, did they shift it? They frequently do, and it frequently is a massive source of stress. Very important to know that. And sometimes that makes them feel more connected and more entrusted, and sometimes it really can be difficult. What was your work environment like? What was your role? What was leadership roles that you had? What kind of impact did you have for any illness or injury, and what impact did it have on your team? So in the military, it's not just the impact on you, but it's the impact on your team. How trusting are you with your fellow service members? How trusting are you with civilians? And this punctuality piece, punctuality can be very important, and it can be life or death in the service. And if you're late, if you're seeing a service member and you're late, it can be a real problem, and it can be very frustrating. So again, that punctuality is really important. And we're not always punctual. Things happen, right? But just own up to it. Just talk about it. Share your concerns. Say, yes, I'm sorry that happened, and do what you can, because they will respond to that. Good for you for coming to this appointment today. Did you have any reservations about coming here? Are there any barriers about coming here? How was the drive? What was that like for you? I think this kind of explosion of virtual care and acceptance, I should say acceptance. Thank you, APA, accepting virtual care, because it's been huge. It's actually allowed us in my VA to actually see more people. I just actually picked up a new client in Duluth, Minnesota. What are the benefits of seeking help? What are the detriments of seeking help? In what ways is taking care of yourself consistent with being a good Marine, with being a good airman? So again, you're pulling that back in together. So the cultural dilemmas and military ethos elements, one of them is selflessness. Placing the welfare of others above one's own welfare. So you can see the conflict that will have in treatment. In treatment, in GA, they talk about this as a selfish program, right? You have to focus on you. We talk about it, we use that analogy of, you put the oxygen mask on you first and then the person next to you. That might not be something that's natural for someone's in the service. Loyalty. Committing to accomplishing missions and protecting comrades in harm. And what the vulnerability is this survivor guilt, complicated bereavement after losing friends, or after making a decision that appeared to be correlating or causing an issue when there was like maybe a correlation at best, and maybe it's just this random event, more likely, yes, a random event. Stoicism, displaying toughness and the ability to endure hardships without complaint. When people are first enrolled or first come into the service, it's very, very difficult for a reason. That working through and displaying toughness is key. So what happens is people don't acknowledge these significant symptoms for a very long time sometimes. Moral code, following an internal moral compass to choose right over wrong. And then the vulnerability is feeling frustrated or betrayal when others fail to follow this moral code. Or it doesn't go the way because of, random events that might happen. So again, there's lots of stories that we've worked with over the years. These are some from the Deployment Psychology website about talking about these other, this tension between honor and self of inadequacy, commitment to excellence. I wouldn't want to just sit back while I watch other people go in and do stuff that makes heroes. I want to be a hero too. So you will see people that were never deployed that will feel this sense of like anxiety and frustration that they never got the chance to be that hero. Lots of issues with loss and guilt. And there's actually a really good treatment program now about that really targets this piece of PTSD. And it's been very successful. It was looking at sort of like the level of guilt among some of the people who have PTSD that wasn't healing with other evidence-based treatments. So it bothers me a lot. I really don't know how to explain. It's just an emotional battle with me constantly because I went to war to do something. I just never thought that this would happen to me, but it did. Loss, guilt, depression, and the last line here, I think it will be with me for the rest of my life. Loyalty and courage. Well, as an engineer, I was in the front of the patrol. I pretty much was clearing the lane for them to safely go through, and being hit, being wounded. That's one less engineer they have to protect them. So in a way, I feel like it's my fault if something happens to them because I wasn't there to protect them. So again, just recognizing in the statements and in the discussions that they have, and I would say it unveils over time. It kind of unfolds like slowly over time. Protecting America, that's something that we think about on a daily basis. In a way, it's kind of more like a weight on our shoulders. And a lot of us realize why we're there. I know a lot of people have kind of forgotten, but we know that we're there not only to protect our own, but to protect our country as well. We get it. We get the idea. So some pitfalls can be, hey, soldier, and they're a Marine, like I told you earlier. Bravo, Zulu, yeah, okay, making fun of their and you will say, like, I say, what was your MOS? And some people will go into this whole thing. I'm like, I have no idea what you just said. But again, it's just asking, but, being mindful of that cultural pitfall of coming up with, to a soldier, it's not as hard to, it's not as hard as how the Marines have to train, right? No, I've never seen a training exercise, but I can imagine what it's like. No, you can't. Actually, I had somebody say a couple years ago, was a policeman, and said it's like being in the service. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's not like being in the service. I would not say that. I mean, it's serving, but it's not like being in the service. You're not being deployed, to a war zone or just away from your family for long lengths of time. Sounds like Saving Private Ryan. So again, there's some cultural pitfalls that we can easily fall into as we're having conversations with folks, and just being mindful of this. You've been deployed? That sounds great. That sounds terrible. Or does that suck? Or you're a hero. Or I understand completely. PTSD's caused it. Military broke you. No one's broken. Actually, there's that pottery, in Japan. If it's broken and they reseal it and they decoratively, it's all got cracks and it's all sealed. I can't remember the name of it. But it's stronger and more valuable after it's been broken and then put back together again. And I think of that as for people as well. Did you do your homework? Just let go of the homework, people. If they like homework, great. If they don't like homework, don't do it. Don't, you're just irritating. So conveying understanding and respect through, again, understanding their experience, understanding wanting to listen, assess and understanding their worldview. What do they think about their world after they get out of the service, particularly after they've experienced this? I see a shift in belief in God here too. I've heard a lot of people say if that kind of thing can happen that I saw in the service, there cannot be a God. So sometimes GA can be hard for folks if they're just hearing. Sometimes it's not all God there, but they'll just hear the God part, and some people will get really tied into that. So I have like this GA 101 course that I teach my folks. I did it at the Albany conference one year, and all the GA folks were hanging around with me. They're like, "What are you going to say about GA?" And then someone goes, "She's good. She's fine. She's a friend." I really, really appreciate GA. So I'm going to end with this, and because I could have just showed this, but it would have been a very short presentation. This is basically military culture. Let us be then warriors at the heart and enlist in our inner cause the virtues we have acquired through blood and sweat in the sphere of conflict. Courage, patience, selflessness, loyalty, fidelity, self-command, respect for elders, love of our comrades and the enemy, perseverance, cheerfulness in adversity, and a sense of humor, however terse or dark. So thank you. Any questions? I got 3 seconds.